What is the creepiest/strangest thing that has happened to you, or a friend or family member, that creeps you out to this day? When I was 6, 28 years ago, my mom and dad took me and my younger sister to a MLB game, leaving my grandmother to babysit my youngest sister. When we got back, my grandmother told my folks that two guys had come by the house with photography equipment and asked whether a young girl with red curly hair lived there, and that they had spotted her and that she would be a great child model for some advertising work they were doing. When my grandmother said she wasn't home, they said they would come back another time. My grandmother and mom didn't think much about it, but my dad said something's not right here and called the police. 15 minutes later, several FBI agents showed up and began conducting interviews with my grandmother and my parents while I ran around and showed the agents my Matchbox police helicopter. Turns out we had been targeted by a child theft ring. The photographers would take a bunch of photos and wait until the toddler threw a tantrum, and the photographers would then ask the mother to go grab a toy to keep the child entertained. While the mother was out of the room, they would grab the child and bolt, leaving everything else behind. The FBI told my folks that my sister had already been sold and would have been out of the country within 24 hours if they got her. We were advised to change preschools and other aspects of our daily routine. It still gives me the chills to think about what could have happened to her. Needless to say, Mom became pretty overprotective. It was a few years before she even trusted us with a babysitter. So I am at Walmart standing in front of the French bread. Notice this strange guy standing there, staring at the food. About 40 years old, jeans shorts, little overweight, handlebar mustache, tied shirt, flip-flops. I pick up one loaf of bread and he turns to me with a strange smile. Walk away from creepy.jpg. After a while, 30 minutes or so, I change my mind and go back to the bread aisle, and the dude is still standing in the same spot, just staring. So I put the bread back, he immediately grabs it, the one I just put down, and storms to the cash register. Pays and leaves. That is the only thing he bought. What the hell? I worked with a lady once who was pretty old, I'd say about 70 years old. Since our job was pretty boring, we talked a lot and she had all kinds of crazy stories. But this one creeps me out still. She said when her grandma died they had her buried in a wood box in the backyard, as was pretty custom in those days. Well, years later they have a family plot in a cemetery and decide to dig her grandma up to move her to the family plot. She said when they took the lid off the coffin, it had claw marks all over the inside. The grandma had apparently been buried alive. My mother was almost killed by her stalker neighbor when she was younger. Cops suspect he was hiding in the house with a kitchen knife while she was in the house. Luckily she got a creeped out feeling and ran to her grandparents' house. Edit. So when my mom a youngin', her and her mother lived in a trailer in the backyard of a family member's house. My mom was about 12 at the time that the man in the neighboring house started to stare at her from time to time. She got a creepy vibe from him but figured it was just a harmless lonely guy. One night when my mom was alone she heard something on the roof of their trailer. Then she heard what sounded like footsteps slowly walking along the metal rooftop. Given they were dirt poor at the time they did not have a phone, so she eventually ran out of the trailer and into the house without looking on the roof. When her uncle went outside to investigate, nothing was on the roof. A few weeks went by with no incidents and my mom figured she must have been overly scared of nothing. More messed up stuff would randomly happen, but only when she was alone, and it was always spaced out a week or two. If I remember correctly, this occurred over maybe a couple months before it stopped completely. Months go by without any weird instances at all until one night my mom wakes up to the trailer unbelievably hot. She could feel the heater on full blast. She got out of bed and was about to go to the control for the trailer's heater, but she was overcome with a bad feeling and decided to just go into the house. The uncle went out to the trailer and noticed that the lock on the door was broken or messed with, and he looked inside quickly but didn't see anything. His wife made him call the police, and when they came out they searched the trailer and found one of the kitchen knives behind a chair next to the heating controller. They suspected that the neighbor went into the trailer, turned the heat up and crouched behind the chair waiting for my mom to come by, and then who knows. It's been a long time since I heard the story, but from what I remember the cops questioned the neighbor but really couldn't do anything about it. Luckily my mom and grandmother were able to move out of that town right after that. My mom told me that about 5 or something years later she was visiting other family who lived in a nearby town and she saw the neighbor at the grocery store and she bolted out before he saw her. My best friend and I were having a sleepover at her house. We were teenagers, and for some reason we were home alone. We're goofing off upstairs when suddenly we hear a crash downstairs. We of course freak out for maybe 30 minutes before we get the nerve to go check it out. I grab a bat and we slowly creep down the steps. In the kitchen, we find a glass bowl had fallen and broke, but the really creepy part is that all the pieces had been picked up and put in another bowl on the table. We still have no idea how that happened. Another time with the same friend, we decided it would be fun to sleep outside in my friend's parents' camper. In the middle of the night I woke up to the silhouette of some guy standing in the doorway. He stands for a minute and then walks out. I was still half asleep and wondering if that really happened when I fell back to sleep. The next morning my friend tells me about a dream she had about someone coming into the camper. Of course, freaking out ensued. Apparently someone, a hobo perhaps, she lives right next to the tracks, had been sleeping there without anyone knowing. I had a dog once that was super loyal and loving and would always come running to me when I called and would almost crash into me whenever I had treats for him. One day sitting in the living room, all of his hairs stood up on his back and he was just staring over my shoe growling and showing his teeth. No matter what I would do to try to get him to come to me, he would never break his stare at that one spot and just kept growling. I eventually carried him out of the room because it was freaking me and my roommates out so bad. When I was 15, my stepfather got stabbed right in front of me. There was an altercation in the middle of our street at 2 in the morning that woke our whole house up. My stepfather and my uncle were still up drinking and went outside to see what was going on. There was a young man kicking the shit out of one of our older neighbors, an alcoholic gentleman who lived a few houses down from us. Found out afterward the young man was dating the older man's daughter. My stepfather and uncle went out to break it up and in the commotion, my stepfather was stabbed by the guy. He stumbled back onto the porch and fell, and I tried to catch him. His blood smeared down the front of my shirt. The younger guy took off and we called 911. We were in the hospital until the early morning. When me and my mom got home there was a message on our answering machine. It was a friend of mine from school, crying and apologizing for calling in the middle of the night, but she had just had a dream that there was screaming and a fight and I was covered in blood. She begged me to call her back. The timestamp on the message was the same time as the stabbing. This is in the late 80s, before computers and even cell phones really. I lived on the other side of town from her. There was no way she could have known what had happened. Just a few months ago, while I was still in school, I rented an old house with 2 of my friends. I lived in the basement and they each had a room upstairs. Several strange things happened to me while I was living in that basement. The first was that I had just gotten a dog and he was about 4 months old at the time. Now and then, right when I turned the TV off to go to sleep, my dog would start whining and growling at one corner of my room. He would usually not get on my bed because he wasn't allowed, but during these times, he would jump on my bed and get as close to me as he could, all without his eyes ever leaving that corner. This happened about 5 times over the course of 4 months. Then, toward the end of the school year, when I was about to move out, the scariest thing that has ever happened to me in my life occurred. Under our stairs was a little door that led to a small space that had a dirt floor. There was also a really weird, old wooden piece of what looks like a map nailed to the inside of the door, so it's a pretty spooky place. Up until the day before this incident, we had kept a small chair in front of this door that I laid my coats and things on. But we had some friends over the night before, so we brought that chair upstairs. It was dark, probably 8 p.m. and I had just been upstairs in the kitchen. I had just gotten off the stairs and was about to open the door to my room, when the door to the little closet under the stairs opened so slowly and with the loudest creak I've ever heard in my life. I stood rooted to the spot, frozen in fear, staring at the closet, waiting for whatever was about to come out of it. I literally stood there for about 5 minutes, absolutely terrified. Eventually, I opened the door to my room and locked it as fast as I could. I wasn't sure either of my roommates were home, so I called my female roommate and she was there. I spent the rest of that night upstairs with her, still too scared to go back downstairs. I should mention that I'm a 21-year-old man who does not scare easily. Now I know many of you will probably say it was the wind or the fact that I had just come down the stairs or something just as my roommates did, but I've had those things happen to me before and been kind of creeped out, but this was different. The second I heard that closet open, and looked over to see it opening so slowly, I felt this sheer terror. It honestly felt like there was someone or something else in the room with me that wanted me to see that door open. Well, I'm late, but whatever. So about 2 years ago I was in my room reading a book when I hear it. Soft as ever, Two little girls giggling. Not just any giggle. It was the kind of giggling you hear in horror movies. I immediately put down my book and listened. After about a minute of holding my breath, I decided it must have come from outside. Then that night, just as I'm about to drift off to sleep, I hear it again. Two little girls giggling. Now it was 2 a.m. and I was pretty sure there weren't two little girls outside my window at that time of night, so I began to freak out. I sat up in my bed and waited for what felt like forever, just listening. Then I hear it again. I jumped out of my bed and go spend the rest of the night in the guest room. By the next morning I was convinced my room was haunted. For the next week I avoided my room and spent my nights in the guest room unbeknownst to my family. I was afraid to tell anyone for fear I was going crazy or they wouldn't believe me, but every time I spent more than an hour in my room I would hear those two little girls giggle. By the end of the week I was a mess. I could barely sleep and was terrified of my room. Then one morning my brother walks up to me and says, "You deaf or something?" Obviously I was confused, and after further questioning he tells me about this small device he had placed in my room. Apparently it's like some sort of prank device that's easily hidden and can make a variety of different noises. My brother, however, chose so creepy little girls giggling sound. He wondered why I hadn't heard it or said something about all week, and I just wanted to punch him in the face. So my room wasn't haunted after all. Moral of the story: sometimes your brother is just an asshole. My great-grandfather awoke to a man standing in the corner of the bedroom watching him and my great-grandmother sleeping. They lived out in the middle of nowhere, so they never used to lock their doors. Apparently this man had just broken out of a mental institution and walked there. When I was 7 years old, my mom gave birth to my little sister. Me and my dad went to visit her in the hospital to check out the new family member. As 7-year-olds often do, I got bored, so my parents sent me to the kiosk right outside the main building to get an ice cream. As I was walking towards the kiosk I cut over the lawn as it was a shorter walk. Suddenly I feel and hear a really heavy thud right behind me. I turn around to see the warped, mangled body of a man in a hospital gown, maybe 40 to 50 centimeters from where I was standing. The man had jumped off the hospital roof after receiving news he had terminal cancer. My mom and a lot of the others in the birth ward even saw the guy flying past the windows. The guy basically just fell short of killing me with him. A group of doctors and psychiatrists asked me to get emergency therapy, but I insisted on getting my ice cream and go home. This day I can still recall the thud of the body hitting the ground and his body lying next to me, clear as crystal. I still tell this story sometimes, mostly when I'm drunk or high. I don't know why it comes up, but I think shit stuck with me. My grandmother told me a story that creeps her out still. Back when my grandfather was alive, my grandmother woke up one night to hear something smash downstairs. She woke my grandfather up and made him go check it out with a baseball bat, and when he got downstairs there was a broken flower pot in the middle of their family room floor, about 20 feet from where it usually was. There was no dirt trail, it was just smashed on the floor in the middle of the room, as if someone dropped it straight down. I have a story that didn't happen to me, but rather my friend's dad. This guy isn't the type to bullshit, so I believe him 100%. My friend's dad, we'll call him Jack, and his brother, we'll call him Tom, lived with each other in the 80s. It was just the two of them living in the house, no one else. So, this one night Jack is coming home at night and walks into his living room to see a bunch of old people sitting around talking. As he walks in, they all just quiet down and awkwardly look at him as he walks by. He doesn't see Tom anywhere, so he just assumes Tom will be back to tend to his guests. Jack has work the next morning, so he goes in his room to get some sleep, but is kept up from all the people talking. He walks out from his room and is promptly met up with Tom, who is coming out of his room to tell Jack to keep his friends quiet. However, Jack was coming out to tell Tom to keep his friends quiet. They walk out from the hallway into the living room only to see that it's empty with the leftover smell of musk. We were hanging out at a friend's house playing SSBB, and suddenly my friend pauses and mutes the TV. We start listening and there comes this slow sound of a piano key being played. My friend has a wall piano. We all get close, and start calling out to see if anybody is there. No response, so we decided to walk out slowly and take a look at what is making the noise. Turns out one of the mechanisms inside the piano was slipping and the old string was elongating, thus making it sound like it was being played over and over again. We had some laughs after the chilling moments. Also, I won the match with Olimar. Marth didn't have a chance. Oh man. Junior year of college. Not my proudest moment. Me and maybe half a dozen friends are hanging out on Saturday night and we are just crispy baked. Basically the second the last bowl was finished it happened. Knock at the door. Serious knocking. Panic knocking. What do? Cops? Gotta be cops. We are so fucked. I'm getting kicked out of housing this time. One of the girls goes to answer the door. A guy with insane Ted Kaczynski hair and no pants is screaming at the door to let him in. The girl screams and tries to shut the door, but the guy is forcing his way in. He is bleeding pretty bad, and is basically draped over my friend in a heap. He is totally incoherent, just keeps yelling please and making no sense otherwise. My friend runs down to help the girl. I could muster precisely zero courage. I was scared to death. Terrified. I stood at the top of the stairs like a housewife that had seen a mouse in an old cartoon. What do we do? What do we do? Oh God, what do we do? We have to call the police. Right. I can't do it, I'm freaking out, man. I don't know what to do with my hands. Someone calls and tells the police an old, possibly homeless man is trying to force his way into the apartment. My terrified, super baked mind could only reason that a homeless guy was breaking into our place. Someone calls the police and I remain totally panicking at the top of the steps, helping in no way whatsoever. My friend has wrestled the guy out of the apartment and is trying to calm him down. I made sure the top of the steps were secure. Eventually the cops come and they take the disheveled, pantless homeless man away in an ambulance. We close the door and sit back down in the living room. Is anyone else not baked at all anymore? Someone asked. We were not. Frazzled, we decided we'd smoke some more and try to relax. We'd go over the series of events 100 times over the next few weeks. I tried to downplay my role as the guardian of the stairwell. Like a week later we'd find it out it was neither an old, nor homeless guy, but rather a friend of a friend on a really bad acid trip who had lost his pants and ran through a field in a panic. Lived in the Hollywood Hills and this happened in the early 80s, crazy knocking at my door at 9 p.m. I go to answer the door and there's a lady there just hysterical, talking about there's so much blood. She looks normal and is dressed in clean clothing, so we let her in. She tells a story about seeing someone get stabbed. I call the police, and 2 uniformed LAPD officers arrive in 10 minutes. They take the lady away, and tell us that she was reported missing, has a mental condition and lives up the street. All good. 30 minutes later, another knock at the door. 2 different cops this time, responding to the call. They have no idea who the other 2 cops were. Take our information and statements, description of the officers and the lady as well. Radio conversations back and forth ensue, and they really don't have any idea how any other cops could have picked her up, because they were given the call 40 minutes ago. I supervise the night crew, 4 midnight, at a Subway. The day crew has never mentioned it, but the night crew always make jokes about our sub-ghost, although I've stopped being sure that it's actually a joke. Now hear me out. I'm not saying the Subway I work at is haunted. But I'm not saying it's not haunted, either. It's open 24/7, so past midnight just one person stays by themselves until day crew rolls in around 6 a.m., and I always spend at least an hour a night alone, and quite a while with just one other person. Sometimes we hear voices, the music is off, there's only 1 or 2 of us, but we can hear people having a conversation, although it's too quiet to pick out words. The first time I heard voices I looked at my supervisor and asked if she heard them too, and she looks me in the eyes and casually says yeah, it's the sub-ghost talking. It sounds like a joke, but now I realize when I'm training a newbie on the late shift I've given the casual it's just the sub-ghost response more times than I can remember. There's voices, there's weird crashing noises, sometimes when no one is in the room things fall off the counters for no discernible reason. Once our owner bought new paper towel auto dispensers to replace the old push dispensers. I was alone right before the graveyard guy came in, when I heard a towel dispense. I walked around the corner and everything was quiet. I was about to walk away when another towel came out. Then another. Then another. Finally it goes full sub-ghost and dispenses the entire roll continuously without stopping, much like when a cat finds out how to unroll your toilet paper. It only stopped when there was no paper left, no one else was around, but a few days later the owner switched them back, so we now have the manual paper towels thingies back. If there is a sub-ghost, he's a homie, and I don't really mind. Stupid day crew is oblivious, but us night crew tend to become quite familiar with the sandwich spook, and its presence is so constant. It's a strange night when something isn't explained that by so ghost, that the voices have almost become comforting. This happened to my friend. She told me that when she was little she was playing with her little brother and sister one night. Her little brother looked out the window and said, "Who is that man?" They all went to the window to see what he was talking about. She said there was a white figure sitting on top of the telephone pole. Looked like a man. He was staring at them with a huge creepy smile, then he just stood up and jumped off the pole and simply vanished before they saw him hit the ground. She said it scared them so much, her sister won't even talk about it. Creepiest thing will forever be the man who watched me at my window. It's nothing paranormal, but honestly, I was texting my girlfriend, playing a game, and I heard rustling outside my window. Keep in mind I live in the basement as an apartment at my mom's house. I don't have any curtains, and I turned off my iPod. I could see someone actually staring at me. This went on for about 10 minutes. I texted my little sister to get the bat, and turn on the lights upstairs. After he saw the lights, he ran off. I have never been more creeped out, except for the recent occurrence. Thought I imagined the whoosh and plop sound in the middle of the night. I brushed it off. Next morning, stepdad was cleaning the yard and found the AC cover in the other window well. I went upstairs to get ready to wash my mom's car when they told me. They asked me if I heard anything, so I told them. I keep a knife and an aluminum bat with me. For the people who will likely ask why we haven't called the police, we did the first time. They said they couldn't do anything. Short of breaking into the house, we're stuck dealing with this person, or people, until they do break in. I delivered newspapers in a fairly rural area the summer after I graduated high school. One night, it's pouring rain and I'm driving down this dirt road that is a dead end to a farmer's house. I've been down this road a few dozen times and know the routine. Drop the paper off in the box at the end of the drive, whip a shitty, back up the road and off to my next stop. This time, as I am getting out of my car to place the newspaper in the holder, I see this man in the ditch wearing a drenched white shirt running at me as fast as he can. He got within 20 feet of me. I could see what my mind pictured as a hatchetorax. I had never ran so hard in my life. I ran back around the front of my car, jumped in and took off. Everything happened so fast that I almost didn't realize where I was. It must have been about 5 to 10 miles later that I attempted to call 911. No signal using my Motorola flip phone in the middle of nowhere in the year 2000. I had to stop at a farmer's house to call the police at 2 a.m. Turns out the guy killed himself within an hour of his run with me in that wooded ditch. There I was, a young man in a crowded Chicago bar. It was 2 a.m. and I was slightly intoxicated. I had just been denied by the girl I foolishly spent the whole night talking to, and I celebrated by taking a couple more shots. Suddenly, all the alcohol I had drank that night came rushing to my bladder, so I decided to head to the bathroom before calling it a night. After stumbling through the crowd, I finally made it to the dilapidated bathroom that was located downstairs. When I walked in, I was met with a shocking sight. There, standing in the middle of the men's bathroom in a shitty bar at 2 in the morning, was a topless blonde breastfeeding what looked like a newborn babe. Whether I was too drunk, or just in shock at what I was seeing, I couldn't seem to move or speak. The silence was broken when the woman, clearly appalled that I was staring, yelled, "Do you mind?" and proceeded to squirt her breast milk at my face. The woman's attempt to hit me was successful. Without saying a word, drunkenly thinking I was somehow in the wrong, I walked out of the bathroom, wiped the breast milk from my face, and exited the bar. Since it all happened so fast, it wasn't until the next morning that I was able to process the absurdity of what had happened the night before. This whole thing was probably just a coincidence, but it still freaks me out. I was waiting at the bus stop around 2 years ago, and just start chatting with this lady who was waiting for a different bus. It was just a normal conversation, but there was an odd undertone that I could just barely make out, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I don't know what it was, but I know it was there. Finally my bus comes, I get on and I'm the only one there. All of a sudden I hear "Hey." I glance up and there's a little girl, who says "Remember me?" She reminded me strangely of the woman I was speaking with at the bus stop, but younger. You could cut the tension with a knife, and when I got off I swear she watched me as the bus left. It was probably just a coincidence, but I'm certain that I was the only one on the bus when I got on. Honestly though, it still freaks me out a little bit today. I live in a heavily wooded area just outside my hometown. My backyard goes directly into the woods since my family owns the land I live on. As a child, the woods around my house were always a fun place to explore. My parents built a cabin, and I even built a little fort for myself further down as a little place to go to escape from the world. It was great. When I was about 10 years old and bored, I decided to go outside and walk around the woods in my backyard, maybe hit up the fort or climb some trees. Alone I walked into the woods and made my first stop at the cabin. So once I was there I just kinda sat in a rocking chair and started reading some book left on the floor. I kinda passed out while reading and I had no idea how long I was out, but when I woke up I saw that the sun was starting to set. Naturally I was pretty scared of the idea of being in the woods at night, so I got up and decided to leave. As the sun set more and the woods got darker I started walking faster and faster to get home till I saw my house in the distance. All of a sudden, while I'm walking and not looking where I'm going, I tripped and fell hard on the ground. So I got up and looked for where I tripped and I couldn't see any stump or branch that could have made me fall. This next part is what still makes me chill to the bone every time I think of it. After scanning and finding nothing I turned around to leave and from behind me I heard someone whisper, "Don't leave," right into my ear. I gasped and got out of there. I ran so fast to my house that on the last stretch back I tripped again and rolled down a dirt hill and scrambled to get myself up. So I ran till I was in my backyard and looked back into the woods and all I could see was a dark silhouette of a man, no face, just blackness, walk out until it was on the very edge of the line of trees and it just stood there watching me. In the midst of my fear I just could not move at all and kept staring at it. I really had no idea who it was. After a while of watching it stand there my senses came back and I ran into my house and didn't leave my parents' side for the rest of the day. The creepiest part is I didn't see any clothes on them or anything. It was just a dark figure standing in the woods looking at me, no face or eyes. Needless to say it's been 8 years and I've never gone back into the woods behind my house. My mom just recently told me the story of her friend's creepy dad. One night when she was younger, she stayed over at this friend's house. Friend's creepy dad offered them fresh venison for dinner. Mom had never had venison, but of course ate it as not to be rude. Friend later tells mom that her dad is not a hunter. Years later we learned that creepy dad had murdered and cannibalized several women over the course of his life. Mom is pretty sure she ate human meat. A few years ago when my grandpa was really sick, me and my family were around his bed all saying our last words to him. Things were going normal, as we were all crying and saying goodbye. A little later his breaths were getting less and less frequent and we knew he was about to go, but on his last breath his eyes opened up really wide, he smiled, looking the happiest he had in years, and then he was just gone. To this day I still can't imagine what he felt/saw. Creepiest thing I remember ever happening to me didn't involve paranormal things. I was walking to the store late at night, probably around 11 to 1 a.m. don't remember, but the streets were isolated. I live in the Bronx in a not so safe area, but I've grown up around the not so nice people in this neighborhood all my life to not be afraid that anything will happen to me, since a lot of them actually look out for their neighbors. They still aren't nice people to others, but I digress. While I was walking the streets were completely empty until I heard footsteps behind me. Being the cautious person that I am, I turn around to take a good look at the man for a long minute just in case I had to identify him later. Growing up in an unsafe place, this is typically my line of thinking. Being that I'm a short girl, 5'1", and this man was twice my height, I was a bit creeped out but kept walking like normal. After a while he caught up to me and asked if I was Dominican. I sternly said yes and kept walking. He then asked if I was 18. This was 3 years ago. At the time I was 17. And I replied no and was ready to cross the street because he was freaking me out. As soon as I said no he looked at me disappointed and said oh never mind then and ran away from me. It was such a small thing but it really creeped me out thinking about what may have happened if I had told him I was 18 and what exactly this guy was planning. My wife had a parasite in her abdomen for almost a year. They ended up having to cut it out of her and now it lives with us and I'm responsible for feeding it. Then it happened 2 more times. My boyfriend works night shift, and I was asleep alone in the house. I get woken up in the middle of the night by my puppy whining in the living room, and I assume it's because he wants outside. I'm just about to open the back door, when I hear this weird scratching/clicking sound at the front door, like someone was sticking something in the lock. I go to check, and I can see the silhouette of somebody standing there through the window in the door. I then notice there is a second figure in the living room window, although it's too dark to make out any features. I know they can see me because I didn't have any blinds at this point, and they just stood there. I totally freaked and called the cops, then my dad. I huddled in the kitchen out of sight of any windows and waited for someone to come. My parents live across town and showed up before the cops. They were gone at this point, but the neighbors across the street were up and saw the car. I ended up staying at my parents' place that night, and when I came home the next morning, I noticed the basement window was partially kicked in. I got a security system installed the next day. I still have no idea who it was. Kidnapping attempt in the 1980s. Sacramento neighborhood late at night, visiting a friend when I was maybe 9 to 10 years old. 3 of us walk out to go play at this park, elementary school several blocks away at around 10 p.m. at night. We were playing frisbee in the street in front of the school and our frisbee lands in the street as a white van pulls up and stops, as if to allow us to get our frisbee. I walked toward the van and grabbed the frisbee, then moved to the side to allow the van to pass. As the van passed, the sliding door opened and a guy dressed in black like a ninja came flying out and tried to grab me. He had a harness on and the van had been rigged with a telescoping mechanism that allowed him to come out around 5 feet while hanging from this harness, like they do in some haunted houses where people appear to be flying, and it was operated by another person inside, also dressed in black. So there was at least 3 people involved in this attempt. I barely dodged his attempt to grab me and all 3 of us ran toward the elementary school and hopped the fence, about 6 feet tall, ran along the fence through bushes and then hopped a second fence, about 15 maybe, that allowed us to be inside the school. We were scared as hell and could hear the van driving around and assumed they were in hot pursuit. We found a way to get onto the roof of the school from inside, thank God, and proceeded to observe the van driving around the school for at least 30 minutes in an obvious attempt to find us. This scared us even more because one would think the would-be kidnappers would flee, but I suppose they thought we could identify them. This was before cell phones, so we stayed up there until around 45 minutes after we last saw them. It appeared that some of them were searching for us on foot also, which added to the fear. We eventually escaped and went back to my friend's house, and never told anyone in our family out of fear of being punished. This isn't supernatural or anything, just good old human creepy. In the late 90s I went to a yard sale about 6 blocks from my house. I live in a fairly small town. I found this silver cigarette case that I thought would make me look stylish and uber sophisticated at the bar. I bought it for $2 from a guy that was at least 85 years old. I took it home and immediately dropped it on the sidewalk and dented one corner, but it was still good looking, so I used it for a while. After a couple bar trips it became a pain, as it only held 8 smokes. So I tossed it in a nightstand drawer and forgot about it. A few months later I saw another yard sale at the same place and stopped to look. I found a cigarette case just like the one I bought and picked it up. It not only had the same dented corner, but I opened it up and there was a cigarette that was my brand inside. For some reason I felt the need to buy it again for $2 from the same old geezer. When I got home the case was not in my nightstand. I will never forget the smile that old fucker gave me when I bought it the second time. When I was a child I vividly remember having dreams where I was in a toy store, or was playing with a toy I didn't have, and if I gripped it really, really hard, I would wake up with the toy in real life. My family was by no means poor, but very often my toys were bought from garage sales. They had bought me a really cool He-Man action figure. For too long he didn't have a Skeletor to fight. I begged and pleaded, and my family tried to find one at garage sales. No luck. One night I dream about playing with a Skeletor at the toy store. I wanted it so bad. At some point I realized I was dreaming. I didn't want to stop playing with it. So I gripped it hard in my hands, making sure that when I woke up I would have it. And I did. I was stoked. My family asked me where I had gotten the toy, knowing that I wanted one. When I told them I took it from a dream they seemed pretty amused. In retrospect they likely bought it for me and slipped it to me in my sleep. If that was the case, they did this a few more times. Another time I had took a Power Ranger from my dream, and then a G.I. Joe car. Hell of a power to have as a kid. I'm a female, first of all. I'm 21 now, but when I was 4 years old, my sister had just turned 16. She had just gotten her license and was so excited. It was probably only September, and she got her license in July. My sister is from my dad's first marriage, and she lived with her mom and stepdad while I lived with our dad and my mom. We lived about 30 minutes apart. My dad worked late hours, and my mom frequently traveled for work, so I had to spend a lot of time at babysitters, which was costly, until my sister got her license. My dad finally gave her permission to pick me up after she got out of school and take me to her mom's until he was off work. She was so excited to finally be able to use her license. I know I said I was only 4, but I remember this event so vividly. There are parts of it, understandably, that I've forgotten over the years. It took years for my sister to even ask me if I remembered it, but when I told her all the parts I remember, about 80%, she filled in the rest for me. It was one of the first times my sister would get to pick me up from my babysitter, which means it would be one of the first times she'd been allowed to drive with me alone. Almost as soon as we pulled onto the main road, a white pickup truck swerved behind us. Weird, but whatever. After a few turns, my sister noticed that the truck still followed her. Even when she would just switch lanes, he was right there switching behind her. My sister, being a bit of a paranoid person, tested it a little and switched lanes several times. She said she heard his tires squealing by his quick cuts to get behind her again. She told me not to worry, and I remember being an oblivious little kid. She looked scared, but I had no concerns. The man started to get really angry. I don't remember anything about what he looked like. I do remember that he had this look of pure hate on his face. Strange that you can sometimes remember expressions but not the faces they were on. He wasn't angry, he was full of hate. He was honking the horn repeatedly, just laying on it, and he was very close to our car. He was swerving back and forth, trying to get our attention. He would pull up beside us occasionally, flip us off, and honk. The first big event came about when we pulled up at a 4-way stoplight. It's a bigger one, so there was a lot of room in the intersection. We were the first ones at the stoplight in our lane, and nobody was beside us. The man used this lane to pass us, and pulled his car in front of us almost in the intersection. He was blocking us. I so vividly remember that white pickup truck. He got out of it, and started storming towards our car. He was screaming so hard I remember thinking his face almost looked purple. Neither one of us remembers what he was saying, but he pulled up his shirt to reveal to us that he had a gun. He pointed to it and at us, threatening us, and closing the gap between us. My sister put her hand over my body, told me to close my eyes, and floored it through the intersection. She said she was worried we were either going to hit him, or get hit in the intersection, but it was a better chance than sitting there and waiting for the psycho with a gun. He hopped back into his car and followed us. My house was closer to where we were than my sister's, so for some reason, she decided to go to my empty house. Obviously, he followed us and blocked us into the driveway. He got out and walked towards my sister's parked car, pulling his gun out. Once again, she had to think fast and swerve her way across our lawn back out on the road. This is before cell phones, and she had just started driving and was still young. She had no idea what to do. He followed us back onto our neighborhood road, pulling up next to our car and hitting his truck against us, trying to make us skid or wreck. There is a smallish area of grass between my neighborhood road and a major busy road, and it was obvious he was trying to push our car hard enough to send us into the traffic beside us. He had his gun up on his dashboard still, all within reach. I remember him doing that little gesture where you drag your finger along your throat, like you're slitting it, like he was going to kill us. His face was still purple. There was a gas station nearby and my sister decided on the last thing she could think of. I remember her talking to me so seriously and sternly. She told me she needed me to be a big girl, and the second we pulled by the door of the gas station, to undo my seatbelt and jump out, run inside so fast that I shouldn't even worry about closing my door. I was to run inside and go directly to the person behind the counter and tell them to call 911 because a bad man was following us. We pulled in and she threw the car in park and I jumped out and did as I was told. She was only a few seconds behind, but she had to actually stop the car, park it, turn it off, whatever. She closed her door and mine for me, and just ran inside with me. The man came into the parking lot behind us, and when we were inside, he went through my sister's car. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. They never found him, and we never knew what provoked him or what his plan was. The only thing he took from the car was my sister's ID and the cash she had on her. Sorry that was so long, I think. But that's my story. I can still so vividly picture what was happening, but I don't remember being scared. I don't remember my sister ever showing that she was freaking out, although later at her mom's she did lose her shit, sobbing her eyes out and yelling. Understandably, I think the way she handled it really prevented it from being a really traumatic experience for me. It's still scary, but it's not something that haunts me. This didn't happen to me, but it happened to my cousin and was witnessed by another cousin and an aunt. For an ease of the story, we'll say my younger cousin's name is Jenny, my older cousin's name is Jane, and my aunt's name is Myra. So Jenny and Myra are in NYC to visit Jane while she's in her master's program. They tour around NYC and stay at a hotel, I think in Manhattan somewhere. Anyways, middle of the night Jenny is having nightmares. After talking with her after the fact, she described sleep paralysis to the T. Apparently Jenny was being drawn in and suffocated by a massive TV that drove her through the bed and into the ground. She woke up screaming and crying and vomited/pissed herself in the bathroom. My Aunt Myra goes to help her and wash her off. They both head back to bed sometime later. Anyways, they get back to bed. A while later, my aunt checks on Jenny, who is staring directly at her with a blank expression. She's now sleeping with her eyes fully open. My aunt is creeped out all the while she and my other cousin Jane are hearing whisperings and children's voices. So they leave first thing in the morning, but here's the creepy thing. There's a photo of my family at Serendipity where Jenny has fully blackened lips. Not Photoshop blackened, but they're perfectly black, almost as if she had put on some makeup or lipstick. But of course she didn't. I've seen the photo and can post it when I get off work, but it's really weird since it's so symmetrical in the picture. To this day we have no idea why her lips showed up like that. Sorry for the structure, typing on my phone. My great-grandmother once had a repairman come over to fix her water heater in the basement. After he fixed it, he came upstairs and said that my great-grandfather was really helpful. He had died over a year ago. My parents were on their honeymoon to Key West. When they arrived at the hotel to check in, they were told that the room would be non-smoking. With my dad being a smoker, they requested a different room. They got the room switch and went to their room. As they got off the elevator, the smell of fresh paint was overwhelming. Down the hall there was a painter with all necessary supplies laid out around him and was painting the wall. As my parents walked past him, they casually greeted him, and the painter had absolutely no acknowledgement of their presence. Whatever. When they got to their room, the smell of paint was even worse in there, so bad it wasn't even bearable, so they decided to go to the front desk to change rooms. When they explained the situation, the attendant looked very confused and informed them that there wasn't a scheduled paint job on that floor for that day, but agreed to change their room. My parents go back to their floor to grab their luggage, and the painter is completely gone. All supplies cleaned up and gone within 10 minutes, and the smell of paint was completely gone. At this point my parents were freaked out but didn't think much of it and go to their new room. The next morning on their way to breakfast, they overhear a tour guide talking to a group. My parents tuned in when the guide mentioned the floor that they were originally supposed to stay on. Apparently a long time ago there was a painter on the floor painting and fell down the elevator shaft to his death. Now my parents don't normally believe in the paranormal, but after an event like this that they had no explanation for, it freaked them out a good bit. Hitchhiking home from high school. I know, and get picked up by a really weird guy with stereotypical child molester thick glasses. It was really hot in his truck. He probably had the heat on in retrospect, as we drove along a main road, and at one point he mentions the heat and that it was okay if I wanted to take off my shirt. For the record, I am a guy. I said no thanks and then opened the door and rolled out into traffic when the truck was coming to a light. Thank God the door handle hadn't been removed or anything. Bonus, I hitchhiked around a year later and the exact same guy pulled up and asked me if I wanted a ride. He didn't recognize me and I said no, and realized at that point that he must do this kind of thing often. I never hitchhiked again after that day. I have two that still bug me years after the fact. One involves Pop-Tarts and the other is a cabin out in Oregon. The Pop-Tart one still bugs me on a regular basis since it hits me every now and then when I wake up in the middle of the night. Here. Old repost of mine, was around 17 and had gotten home from work rather late. Went straight to my room to change and found myself hungry. It was probably around 1 a.m. by this time and I didn't want to cook anything and make too much noise as I was afraid I'd wake the parents. So when I ventured to my kitchen, I started shuffling through the cupboards looking for a quick fix of snack food to tide me over until the morning. Now our kitchen was positioned so that the kitchen door led to our backyard. The door itself was an old wooden door, but my dad had added one of those metal security gates on the outside for good measure. It was one of the security gates where the holes on the door were small enough so that insects could not get through, and therefore we could leave the wooden door open in the summer to allow for a breeze to go through the house. In addition to the security door, My dad had also installed one of those auto security lights, you know the ones, they go on automatically whenever their motion sensor is triggered. Usually the light would only go on when I would let my dog outside to pee at night. However, on this night he was already lounging in my room waiting for me to come back with some snacks for him as well. Anyways, getting ahead of myself. So, I was busy creeping through the cupboards and finally hit the jackpot with some Pop-Tarts. Knowing my dog, I didn't want to chance him snagging the tart from my hand as I ate it, so I busted those things open then and there and ate them raw. I am hardcore like that. As I am standing there eating the first Pop-Tart, I hear a faint whistling sound from outside. Wood door was open. At first I thought it was the wind, but then I noticed that the whistling was a distinct tune and not random whistling. I didn't know the tune, but I could tell that it was from a song. Sounded like a happy and sad song all rolled into one. No, that doesn't make sense, but that's the best way I can describe it. After standing there for around 20 seconds, I decided that it must be one of my friends that lives down the block screwing with me. Maybe they were on the other side of the fence and whistling there to scare me. Right when I am thinking this thought, I see the security light suddenly turn on. I quickly looked around the surrounding area but don't see anyone or anything that could have set the light off. The whistling is still going on. Now I am in semi-panic mode. Is it one of my friends? If so, where are they hiding? If it's not one of them, then who is it? I am stuck standing there now and can't move as I stare outside waiting for something to happen. Nothing does. A minute or so goes by, with the whistling continuing and the light remaining on. Suddenly the whistling gets louder and I see the doorknob to my metal door start to move up and down, and I can see through the metal door to see that there is no one there. The whistling sounds like it's right outside now, and the doorknob keeps moving like someone is trying to get in. The security light is still on, so I have a clear view of the front of the door and know for sure there is no one there. FCK the Pop-Tarts. I dropped the box and jetted back to my room, slammed and locked the door and hid under my blankets with my bat and dog. I never went out to the kitchen at night after that. My mom told me one that's kinda creepy. When I was a baby, maybe about 6 months old, she put me into my cot to sleep one afternoon. It was a high-sided wooden thing with a drop side for access that required you to press in 2 little nubs, one each corner to release the side. She came upstairs and found me outside the cot, asleep in the middle of the floor about 2 meters from the cot. The sides were up, there is no way I could have opened it, I couldn't stand, and the sides were far too high to jump over. Apparently she never felt comfortable leaving me in the room after that. Also, when my younger brother was born, he was put into that room as his bedroom. One evening me and my mum were on her bed playing with my brother, who was about 1 year old, and we heard this noise coming from his room. Panicked, my mum went to look, and one of his musical toys was in the cot playing to itself despite not being activated. When I was about 6 years old and was playing with the kid next door one afternoon, the lights went out all of a sudden. We were by ourselves since all of her family members were at the hospital with her mom, who was suffering from leukemia then. So when the blackout happened, my friend went out of the house to the porch and was doing something I don't remember. I was by the door looking outside when something made me look back into the house. There, in the living room, was a shadow figure walking around, tall, dark, no recognizable features whatsoever. It was as if someone was wearing a black whole body suit, but not as definite as a real person would be in a room. Wasn't too blurry either, but I noticed it moved around the room as if it were looking for something. I actually wasn't scared at this point, since I've never seen anything like it and I was a curious child. The next thing I knew, it went up to the 2nd floor, and so I followed it and continued to watch the shadow figure walk around the bedroom, again kinda looking for something. Then it started moving towards the wall on my right. I remember thinking this time, oh shit, is it gonna disappear? Is it gonna disappear? And sure enough, it vanished through the wall. I forgot about all this until I was around 17 and was watching one of those real ghost stories on TV in Japan, the ones they show every summer season before Obon holidays. One guy talked about his own experience of seeing shadow figures in a hospital where he was confined in for a few months. He mentioned that he sometimes saw them beside people who were about to die. Chills ran up and down my spine when I heard this. I remember my friend's mom died about a week after I saw that shadow thing. But at least I now have my own understanding of what that dark figure I saw might have been, either death or the thing that picks you up when you die. I was at a mate's house spending the night when I was in middle school. As expected, we'd stay up to all hours, which didn't matter most of the time except the bathroom was right near his parents' room. About the only time we'd get in trouble was when someone would wake them up when nature called. To avoid this, we'd go out the basement door and just pee in the woods. The door stayed unlocked most of the time because we'd managed to lock ourselves out more than once. This was also compounded by the fact that we'd all wander out and find something to do in the woods on a regular basis. This night his older brother was home and kept barging in the basement door and raining chaos from above, so we decided to lock the door just to deter him. Not that it really would have kept him out, but at least he'd have to use the key, and that took barging in fun out of it. About midnight we heard the handle jiggling and didn't think much of it, figuring it was his brother. After about 5 minutes of off and on handle fondling, my vocabulary has decided to not function at a high level today. We finally hit the door and yelled for him to stop. Quiet, no response, no more clattering of the handle. Great, we can move on, right? Well, about 10 minutes later it started again. And the process repeated. This went on for about 2 hours, until finally after telling him to stop we just said screw it and ignored it. He continued for about 30 minutes after our last attempt for him to stop and then just gave up. Well, fast forward to about 9 a.m. We were just stirring and one of my mates had to go to the bathroom. If you've ever had a sleepover like that, there are bodies strewn wherever there is space, and once the first person starts walking around it kind of stirs the nest. We all started stretching and making our way to relieve ourselves of all the soda we'd binged on the night before. As I go walk outside, I grabbed the door handle to close it behind me and noticed it felt rough. After looking at it, I saw that the space around the keyhole was all but destroyed. There were giant scratch marks on every surface and the metal guides were bent and skewed. I asked my friend that lived there what had happened, and he said it was the first he'd noticed it. Not really wanting to get blamed for something his brother did, we went upstairs and told his parents about the night before. After his dad went down to see what we were talking about, he went completely white and ran upstairs to call the cops. Evidently someone had been trying to force the lock open while we were all inside. That's actually happened to me more than once on different occasions. What completely freaks me out about this time was that this person knew we were in there and that we knew someone was trying to get in. Even so, he repeatedly tried to force his way inside. God knows what sort of person that was. When I was younger, maybe around 12, I was alone at home with my sister who was 10 at the time. Our mom went down the road to a family friend's house. It was really late, past 10, and she was still not back. We were watching TV when suddenly someone hit the letterbox twice really hard, and without looking we opened the door straight away. We assumed it was Mom. When we opened it, there was no one at the door, but in the middle of the road there was a lady just standing there staring at us. It was really dark so we didn't see the face or anything properly, and then we just shut the door and sort of shit ourselves. Our mom came back around 20 or so minutes later, but definitely one of the creepiest moments ever. I have loads more, but this would become a massive post if I carried on. Edit. Another creepy story, probably creepier than my original post since I was getting scared typing it lol. So when I was about 7, maybe younger, I went to my mom's best friend's house with my mom in another city. It was just me, my mom and her friend, and nobody else in the house. Except, when I was there, I saw a family which consisted of a mother, a teenage boy, and 2 younger girls that looked really burnt just walking around the house together without taking their eyes off me. At one point, they even told me to go with them. I didn't think anything of it at the point because I assumed they were house guests, but many years later when I told my mom, she mentioned it to her best friend. Her best friend told her they had to move out of that house because they had many haunting experiences, such as finding all her new baby's toys out in the middle of the night after she tidied it, things moved around, and blankets and pillows on the floor as if people slept there. She asked her husband thinking maybe he did it, but he was just as scared as her, so they moved out. Second edit. Another story or two, not as creepy. So I have these cousins who have always somehow lived in haunted houses. It probably makes more sense to say they're haunted. My uncle and auntie used to live in a small house first, and they had just one child at that point, and whenever they were downstairs, they'd hear someone walking upstairs, and whenever they were upstairs, they'd hear someone walking and doing things downstairs. They eventually moved, and then at their third house, strange things happened too. Blankets would get pulled off when they're sleeping. You'd see family members walk into this bedroom that no one stayed in, but when you walk in, no one's there, it's just empty, and this happened regularly. Then eventually, my auntie started going slightly crazy and said it was after she saw this scary ghostly woman standing in the hallway in their house. Eventually they moved out. There was 3 girls and 1 boy, and my auntie and uncle and the family they sold it to also had 3 boys and 1 girl. all around the same age. The other creepy story is also about them, but in their second house, where one day their grandma was taking a nap in one of the bedrooms upstairs. My cousin, probably around 8 at the time, went to her and she called her to take a nap with her, but she just stared at her, then ignored her and walked off to another room. Her grandma went to the room but couldn't find her, so then went downstairs and asked her why she did that. My cousin and her mom replied saying she hasn't left the room for ages. I was out at a restaurant with some friends a long time ago, probably 10 or 11 years ago. We were all pretty stoned and were eating at some Italian place. We had just ordered our food and were all chatting, and some random dude that looked like he smoked a lot of crack came out from the back area. He walked to the front of the place, turned around and looked at everyone in the restaurant and then stopped at me. He looked dead at me and said, "You. I need your help." I sat there thinking, what is this crackhead talking about? Whatever. I got up and went to help him, and apparently he needed help putting on a backpack because it was heavy. There was literally nothing in the bag. Except maybe crack or drugs. There was no weight to it at all, nothing whatsoever. After that he thanked me and walked out. I still have no idea what was in his bag or why he chose me out of a full restaurant of people. Weird people like talking to me for some reason. One time my friend and I slept on the floor in the lounge at my house overnight. We got pretty wasted and decided to go for a walk. We walked to the cemetery on the other side of the block and looked inside. We were staring right into the depths of the cemetery. It was about 2 a.m. At the same time, we both screamed and ran like hell. We had seen a clear, white object move quickly across the cemetery. We initially thought one or the other of us might have imagined it because we were drunk, but we had both seen it at the same time. We ran all the way home, and didn't leave the house again until morning. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.